So good afternoon, good morning. This is Mark Johnson from Loyalty 360. Hope everyone's happy, safe, and well. We want to welcome you back to our new edition of our Loyalty 360 Thought Leadership Series. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Robert Passikoff, who's the president of Brand Keys. They are a New York-based brand engagement and customer loyalty research consultancy. They do a number of unique surveys throughout the year, and today we're going to be discussing the Brand Keys annual survey of iconic American brands that identifies those brands which consumers have kind of a highly patriotic engagement with. So a very unique study you just concluded, right, Robert?
Yes, thank you. It's the 19th year we've done the study. So some interesting things coming out of it. The pandemic itself injected some interesting little jumps and choices that consumers had to make. Yeah.
Okay, great.
New stuff.
It is definitely good stuff, and always it's great speaking with you. It's been a while, but for those who may not know about Brand Keys, can you give us a little description on yourself and everything you do at Brand Keys, and also be good to know exactly what Brand Keys does and how you play in the market?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. I mean, we are a brand and market research company. I mean, that's the foundation. The difference for us, of course, is that we follow a kind of philosophy that Ogilvy spoke of years ago. That I always, good researcher gives attribution. He said, the consumer doesn't behave the way they say. They don't say what they think, and they don't think what they feel. And we found that with consumers being more and more connected over the years, also a lot smarter about marketing than they were, well, you can say a decade ago, but certainly 3 decades ago. The issue became understanding what people really thought about something. We say we want to measure what people think, not what they say they think. And that gives us an edge because the work that we see is highly predictive of behavior. So I have kind of an axiomatic thing, which is if I can get you to behave better toward a brand, the brand ought to do better in the marketplace. And generally, that's what we find. Generally, we find that that the brands that have the highest degree of loyalty and emotional engagement are the brands that generally not only do well in the marketplace, generally they're in the top 1 or 2 in the sector.
Okay. Great. So when you look at that, obviously, how do brands get into that higher echelon? Well, we talked about that emotional engagement. You had talked a little bit about, the customer experience and loyalty. Obviously, a lot of that's predicated on reciprocity. Are there a couple tips that you have that brands should be considerate of if they're trying to move into those higher echelons?
Well, the thing is, and not as a plug. I mean, you and I were talking about the new book that we're writing. The title of which is "Loyalty Ain't What It Used to Be," and that's what's become problematic over the past 20 years. I mean, longer, of course, for folks that harken back to the days when families were either Coke or Pepsi and wouldn't drink one if the restaurant didn't serve their choice. I mean, that kind of loyalty isn't as prevalent. It isn't the foundation for how one defines loyalty these days. There are too many options. Consumers move at the speed that's much faster than brands. So what we look at as a yardstick for engagement and loyalty is, does a brand really know what people expect? I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day and I said, it's interesting because I get, whatever you do something online and they want you to rate it and they say to you, we want to exceed your expectations. And that sounds good, but I'm betting those people have no idea what my expectations are. And it becomes problematic to measure expectations because most of the decision process today is more emotional than it is rational.
Right.
So if it's an emotional metric that you're looking to measure, it's very hard to ask people that directly. People either can't articulate it or they don't really want to articulate. I mean, everyone today, including myself, is technologically linked. I mean, I'm not a Luddite, but I don't really know how stuff works. And if you ask me as to what I really expect about technology, about a computer, about a phone, I'm not sure that I'd be able to articulate that. But we have psychological metrics that allow us to measure those expectations. And that's the key. That's the secret. The brands that are best able to meet these mostly emotional expectations are the ones that have the highest degree of loyalty. And meeting expectations, by the way, is interesting in regards to the most patriotic brands survey that we did,
Yeah.
because we saw some shifts um, during the pandemic. Um, if I had to articulate, I know you had said, you and I had exchanged some emails, and you said, what is patriotism? Well, you can look up the definition of patriotism in the dictionary, and you know, generally what it's going to refer to is, support for your country. But it's become broader than that for brands, which is essentially support for you. Are they there when you need them? And that's what we saw, is that brands that showed up when no others showed up during the pandemic got very high ratings regarding being seen as patriotic.
Okay.
Again, it's a matter of meeting expectations.
So when you say show up, what does that mean? Because brands went through a great deal during COVID, right? There was uncertainty with regard to the economy, there was uncertainty with regard to their technology, and you even mentioned that. A lot of these marketers don't necessarily know how technology works, but they were having to adapt, whether it's buying online and picking in store or worrying about cleanliness. What did you mean by how they adapted?
Well, a lot of the brands look to certain aspects of the category and made decisions to do certain things for consumers. I mean, I think this is a good example, not the easy example. The good example is we saw a lot of insurance companies being seen as more relevant and more uh, attentive to consumers. Why? Well, excuse me. It was farmers, by the way. Give credit to who did it first, because in this world, being first gives you about 4-day head start against everyone else in the category. Um, Farmers turned around and said, these people are not driving their cars. I mean, no one's driving, no one's going anywhere. Yet we charge them for insurance. Let's give them a rebate. And clearly they did. They said that a lot better than I'm expressing it in advertising, which was essentially, we feel your pain, and here's something a little, here's a little something back, because we understand that. I mean, one of the worst things that this is a good example of the difference between thinking something and then just saying something. If you notice, everyone was in it with you during the pandemic. We're with you, Mark. We're here. We're with you. We understand. And the answer is no, you weren't. No, you don't. I mean, you're in as big a box as I am, but in the meantime, brands that, and I just showed up, like Clorox, like Campbell's Soup, like Zoom, were there when people needed them most and expected that kind of thing most. And those come from the more emotional needs, and as I said, not necessarily articulated needs. Although God knows, everyone was looking for hand sanitizer. Um, you know, and it isn't an issue that you got points off because you weren't there. People understood. People understood the situation. But now, having said that, who was there? Who was there for me when I needed this, when I expected someone to be there? And certain brands showed up. Um, I think well, it isn't difficult, but I think it's interesting to understand that the patriotic brand study that we just, that we completed um, in June,
Mm-hmm.
it, it's a resonance about the brand. I mean, there's certainly some very rational lever points that you can point to. I mean, everyone, Jeep has gone crazy because Jeep has been number one for the past 19 years that we've done the study. And you can make the point, well, these are the guys that won World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And not only that, they're in every war movie you've ever seen. I mean, you can't buy advertising like that. And the the rational value that's there translates to people saying, well, okay, yeah, I see them as being highly patriotic. And we're looking at that, the single value of patriotism. You can complain about a lot of other stuff about brands, but this was, a one value examination. So, they show up. Is it resonant? Is there a certain degree of pride? Is there a degree of fulfilling certain expectations that you have that are related to an emotional value like patriotism? And some of that becomes pure imagery. So, we've grown up with a sense that Main Street, Main Street, not Wall Street, Main Street is the foundation of what this country is about. And you look and you see that they acknowledge Walmart for that. I think Disney gets a little bit of a bump for the Main Street celebration, although, hard to ignore the whole of presidents that they've got. I mean, it's those kinds of things that they do that translate to the values that people want and expect.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit why Jeep won. Obviously, you're right. I'm a big World War II buff, and I just actually, in my 10-day jaunt around the country, I've watched a few more World War II series. And you're right, the Jeeps are always in the movies, especially when they paint them with color now versus black and white, so you can see them a little better. What about other brands? Walmart, Disney, Ford, and Amazon. Why have they done so well with regard to patriotism?
Well, I think part of it comes from a sense of innovation, that delivering better against kinds of expectation like this is the kind of thing that people, A, they appreciate, B, they've come to expect. And when we look at them, when we look at who was better at leveraging innovation for things that people had a desire for, we usually see that those brands get a bump in terms of being seen as more patriotic.
Okay. Interesting.
Used to
So,
be, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm just going to say, you know, when Apple was something more innovative than just adding a better camera to the phone, um, they used to show up on the list, very high on the list as well. Um, Names used to do it as well. We used to see a lot of sports teams that had American-based patriotic names like the Cowboys and the Yankees and the Patriots. Um, Less so in the past few years.
okay. So when you look at the survey, you talked about innovation being there and kind of stepping forward. What are some of the trends or changes that you have seen that have occurred in your survey, or maybe questions you may be asking differently or a different approach?
Um, no, we haven't changed. We haven't changed the examination of the single value examination. Um, we have seen that brands are being more highly tested than they have been in the past.
Okay.
And I don't know that it's just the pandemic, although the pandemic has added an additional muddle to what was already a difficult landscape in terms of loyalty.
Okay.
Brands that are able to, and I'm in their gestalt, not their advertising necessarily, um, to be able to differentiate themselves better than the competition in terms of delivery. And I think that if you look at, and as I said before, emotional values are always hard to articulate. People they have more of a sense about it than they're able to rationally describe it. But if you look at the you know the top brands, you see that they were all able to deliver in some quite literal sense, Amazon in the literal sense, I think, better than others when it came to what people wanted. And that's a shift that we've seen because we the other thing, because it's attitudinal as well, is that we've seen more media brands showing up on the list, which we hadn't seen. I mean, we hadn't seen, certainly 5 years ago. I don't think we had a single media brand in the top 50. Now I think we've got 3 or 4 of those brands in the top 50. And that's an extraordinary shift in terms of how people are viewing brands generally and patriotism specifically. And it's balanced too. I don't want to. My son who I think we generously call him a liberal politically, looked at the list before we published it, and he didn't care for some of the names on the list because they're more conservative brands. And his attitude is, take it off, just take it off the list. And I said, well, I said, you go to research hell if you do stuff like that. You're not allowed to do And of course, the list is balanced for political affiliation. So you're seeing about half and half, conservative versus liberal showing up in terms of the media itself. But that's brand new. I mean, it's people say that there have been some questions regarding trust of media, but I don't think that's so. I think that people may have one political perspective or the other, but they're certainly looking toward the media to give them uh, insights that they believe support both their expectations and national expectations.
Okay. So a few more questions. When you look at the customer loyalty, well, what does customer loyalty mean to you? Obviously, you're writing another book. Sounds like you're going to talk about how it's changing. And what does customer loyalty mean to you and to your organization? And how should brands be looking at customer loyalty?
But it comes back to expectations. I mean, that is the critical point. I mean, you and I have had these conversations before. I'm just not a big fan of the reward systems that are out there. I mean, yeah, it becomes added value, but I did a study of, I don't know whether it was the end of last year or beginning of this year, where we looked and we saw that on average, uh, travelers were members of 6 loyalty programs. Loyalty in quotes. I mean, if they get points for traveling on these airlines, and that's terrific. Except when you do the math and you realize that there are only, I think, 11 national carriers left. So you really can't be loyal to, not according to the old definition of loyalty. You can't be loyal to 6 um, of the companies. It doesn't work that way. Not if you're looking at it, as I said, from the old definition of loyalty. Because there have just been so many changes regarding uh, the rational primacy of product delivery on things, that, yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt for me to get extra points if I travel one airline or the other. But ultimately, given the choice between 2 or 3 brands, I'm going to always pick the one that best meets my expectations. And that's the trick, is, do you really know what people expect? And how well does your brand meet those expectations? That's the definition. That's a way of defining loyalty today. I mean, again, high correlation to behavior, which is, I guess, what you want the people to do. You want them to behave better, more frequently better to you, spend more money with you, buy additional products that you've got. I mean, that ultimately was the desire of loyalty. But that's where I think the core lies. I mean, you go out there now, just for, generally speaking. I mean, I'm sure that there are specific examples that people can come up with, but who doesn't know, for example, Coca-Cola? I mean, Coca-Cola, is known by every sentient being in the universe. And yet, if you look at a category like energy drinks, Coca-Cola isn't in the top 3. It isn't in the top 5. It isn't there anymore because they entered the marketplace as Coca-Cola Energy and got like less than 0.5% share. And so they left the marketplace. I mean, they're smart business people. But the question is, well, did you not know their name? And the answer is, well, of course you knew their name. And the question is, Was the product itself terrible? And the answer is no. Product was probably exactly what Red Bull is like. But Red Bull was number one, and they didn't even show up in the top 10. And what it comes down to ultimately is not the name that you know it, not distribution because Coca-Cola owns it, not the price because they can afford to give it away. They certainly advertise more than anyone else in the category. The issue is people ultimately look at something and say, it didn't quite meet my expectations. And that's where it gets tough because, there's no empirical test for taste of, the kitchen tests and things like that. But so why didn't they do well? And when we look at the diagnostic, what drives the category and what people expect, we see where they're low and where they need improvement. And that ultimately becomes the acid test for brands looking for loyalty. As I said at the beginning, basically we do market research, but we do market research using a process that allows us to get under the radar and measure the emotional expectations that people have for a category, and then see how well a brand is meeting them and what they need to do in order to be able to better meet those expectations. Because yeah, exceeding your expectations would be great, except you have to know what they are in the first place.
Right. Well, I think it's been a big challenge that we've seen from brands is that they've always had a hard time truly listening to and understanding the customers. They hear in more of a passive way, but active engagement is very difficult. And I know that we as an organization, we've tried to do things a little different. That's a big challenge as well, because everyone wants something a little different. And just like personalization, it's very hard to do that at scale. So listening to everyone can be very difficult as well. And understanding, unique preferences or interests or attitudes can be a challenge as well. I think that'd be the last question I would have for you. So you look at all these opportunities and getting the brands to have a connection with the customers. Customers are changing. We know that customers are changing, and technology is a great challenge. So how do you leverage the technology, or how do brands get it right? How do they listen to, and how do they change in a manner that pleases most of their customers?
Well, one of the things we've seen is that the aspect, as you raised it, personalization and customization, desire for customization, been around for a while. We did work years ago with Nike in terms of being able to customize shoes for folks. And that's part of it. I mean, technology and the ability to be able to deliver that kind of level of personalization and customization is critical. I think partly media outreach has become the problem for a lot of brands. So we don't specialize in media outreach, but some of my folks have done some work in what we call media GPS, which is the ability to understand that there are certain media platforms that deliver better than others in terms of strategy. Now that I'm talking about strategy, because Lord knows media has gotten to the point where they can find anyone, anywhere, anytime. And that's fine. Location, you need to know where your folks are, but you also need to know how they're using technology and how your brand interacts with that. Excuse me. With Marshall McLuhan, said the medium is the message. God said that, 60 years ago. But it's true. And folks who involve themselves with the technology need to, do a deeper drill down or involve themselves better with brands, because a lot of what you see out there has to do with scoring on outreach rather than scoring on what happened to the brand when.
Right.
And I think that's absolutely critical. I think until someone comes and slaps someone upside the head and says, yeah, we know we can get to them. The question is, what's the best way to get to them, and what's the message that you need to impart regarding values and expectations via that technology.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, I think this was a great interview. It's always fascinating to speak with you, just the depth and breadth of your knowledge around, customer loyalty and obviously the surveys you do. Looking forward to the new book. And I think you bring a lot of great suggestions for marketers to help simplify some of the things that they should be doing to truly listen to and understand those customers.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And everyone, thanks for listening. Join us back soon. Have a wonderful day.